walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors, walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho. Following the serpentine path. Life. Hello, everyone. Before I get into this week's mini episode in the ongoing birth control stories series, I wanted to share something special, which is that today's guest, Sarah Stevenson, actually had me on her podcast, the Goddess in Training podcast, last week to talk about all things related to womb sovereignty. So I'm going to link that podcast interview that we did in the show notes so you guys can take a listen. It was such a joy and a pleasure to be able to record with her and be in conversation. We actually recorded this episode right before we recorded the episode for her podcast. And so it was like a whole Monday morning where I got to spend with her, and it was really, really lovely. So I hope that you enjoy that episode and this episode. Without further ado, let's get into it. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Wadiasid. I'm your host, and it is a big pleasure to have my guest onto the show today, Sarah Stevenson. She reached out to me and answered the call that I put out on my newsletter about bringing women onto the show to share about their stories on hormonal contraceptives, IUDs, the pills, injections, all that stuff. And for those who might not be familiar with the show or kind of what I'm doing right now, I am releasing a mini series all about women's birth control stories. This first came about because I have been teaching a class this month of October. We just started our first class this past week. We're continuing on the next 2 weeks. People can join at any time. And it is all about natural birth control, natural pregnancy prevention, learning how to transition off of hormonal contraceptives and IUDs, learning how to track your menstrual cycle so that you can observe your natural fertility window, and then learning how to work with plants, so herbal allies for pregnancy prevention and conscious contraception. And so this series is all a big conversation about the reality of birth control and what women are moving through and how they have found healing after their transition off of it. So Sarah was one of the many women who reached out and booked an interview to come onto the show and share her story. She has a lot of really beautiful wisdom to offer. So without further ado, Sarah, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me, Claire. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's an honor. Well, let's get into it. Let's, I guess, start at the beginning, how you initially ended up going on to birth control and what your experiences were like, and, any part of your trajectory that you want to offer to people.
Sure. I think I have the typical story of at least women here in the United States where I was in high school and was struggling with cystic acne and also starting to have sex and kind of use the acne as a reason to go to my mom and be like, I think I need to be on birth control, without having to admit that I was having sex. And so I started on the pill probably when I was 15. And looking back, I wonder what immediate effects it had on my body. I soon after that gained a lot of weight. They say the pill does not do that, but it definitely did for me. And went into a deep state of depression a couple of years after that. I mean, there are so many different factors that can play into it, but um, I then spent a period of time off of the pill because I kind of saw that correlation, and things didn't really resolve. And then I got into a long-term relationship and went back on. And so throughout my life, I have been on and off hormonal birth control, the pill. Um, Gosh, I don't know how many times. I am now in a state where I am completely off of it. And also in a place where I am on a journey to deeply listen to my body and to my intuition, and have received a lot of messages that this is where I'm supposed to be, that I'm supposed to have as little interventions, that I can be as clear and receive the signals as best I can with this vessel that I have, without any kind of chemicals getting in the way.
Yeah, sure. I totally get it. I started on the pill because of hormonal acne. And then I think I was on it for maybe like 6 months-ish. And I was also given doxycycline. And then my acne cleared up and I was like, I'm pretty again. Great. And I was also, 16, coming into my own experience of sexuality and wanting to experience romance and dating and boys and all of that. And yeah, it just felt ugly, and no woman wants to feel ugly inside or out. But then, I went off of it and then I ended up going back on it around the time that I got into my first serious relationship. And something that you spoke to around, I think a lot of women do this, right? Like they go on the pill because there are potentially other issues that are occurring, hormonal issues, but there's also like a introduction into sexuality that maybe they don't want their parents to know about. And so then it becomes this thing around like secrecy and like I have to hide stuff from my parents. And I find that to be a really interesting correlation, right? Because it's like in an ideal world, we would have a framework within our family systems where we can speak openly with our parents about sex and it not be a thing around shame or guilt or secrecy or hiding things or, God forbid, like medicating ourselves in order to have sex. So I wanted to kind of drop that in there. It was something you said it and I was like, whoa, yeah, the secrecy. Crazy. Anyway, please continue.
Yeah, I know. It makes me think too about the connection between the secrecy that we so often feel at that time in our lives when we're starting to become sexually active and not feeling like you can be transparent about it. And maybe that's more at the core of the acne and the dysfunction than anything else, right? And then we put another thing on top of it, which then causes these other issues. And that's the society that we live in, where we are constantly looking for band-aids and putting band-aids on things, which then cause other problems. And so I, very early on in my life, my adult life, I started going down a holistic path. I had my children really young, pretty young, for by today's standards. I had my son when I was 25. And I think just intuitively, I knew that I wanted to have a more holistic, natural path with birth. And so the one thing that I really am so grateful for is I found this book called Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Weschler, and devoured it, and gave it to every woman that I knew, because it just opened up this door to natural ways of monitoring your cycle, knowing exactly when you ovulate. And at the time, I used it more to prevent pregnancy before having my children, and then to maximize, and I was able to get pregnancy in the first cycle that I had that intention. Um, and so I did not use it throughout my life. I kind of wish that I had, but I think it was, she doesn't go into the ways to prevent pregnancy, and like I think the herbal things that I'm so excited to learn about in your class, because I think that was the missing piece, that like, oh, well, it's great that I understand exactly when I ovulate, and I in tune with my body, but I didn't feel much control. Like there was no way to have um, to prevent things, to prevent pregnancy, besides abstinence or using a condom and all of those things, which were inconvenient. But if I had other tools, I think that I would have really gone that route and not use the hormonal birth control. And the one thing that you wrote about that just really, really spoke to me, because I haven't really heard anybody else talk about this, is the fact that this was my experience, that going on and off birth control throughout my adult life, I have been attracted to very different men when I am on it and when I am off it, to the point where it has really negatively affected relationships, because I've gone off and I feel absolutely have felt no attraction, no sexual attraction to somebody who I was still in love with, but just did not feel it in any way, shape, or form, and almost to the point of repulsion. Like I just didn't. I had no desire whatsoever, and when there were advances, it was just my body is saying no very, very clearly. And so it's very, very difficult to overcome that, especially in a marriage. Um, and so when you wrote about that, I was like, yes, finally, somebody has had the same experience that I've had in my life. Um, and so I'm just excited to be in a point in my life now where I have more control and where I can fully be myself and have my body operate in the way that it was meant to.
Yeah, totally. I get it. And I will link that essay that I wrote on Substack for people because I think I've spoken about it on the podcast before. I've definitely written about it where my first serious relationship that I was in coincided with me getting back on the pill. And I was on the pill for, I think, 3.5 years, the first 3.5 years of our 5 year long relationship. And when I went off of it was a very strange thing because my libido came back so strong. And I felt like I was almost going through like a second puberty of rediscovering my sexuality. And that was really beautiful and really healing and also super intense, to be, I guess, 20 years old and to feel like I was like 13 or 14 again in terms of my like sexual maturation process. That was shocking. And so, on one hand, I had a very strong libido. And on the other hand, I had this man who I had been in a relationship for 3.5 years with at this point. And like you said, I felt like physically repulsed. And it's really sad, like his voice, his hands, his smell, like the way he touched me, everything about it. I was just like you said, the full body shut down, like, no. And unfortunately, I didn't listen to that because I had been so disconnected from my body for so long for many, many reasons in my life. But a big factor was birth control, hormonal birth control. And so I didn't know how to listen to those intuitive body signals and to say, yeah, this is true for me. I'm not sexually attracted to this man. I can't be with him in the way that I would want to be with a man as a woman. And I've seen so many women go through this process, like years later, as I've learned so much more about the female hormonal matrix, learned about how our pheromone receptors are just completely altered when we're on hormonal contraceptives and the types of partners that we're attracted to who actually are more aligned with a more similar genetic blueprint, essentially. And so when we go off of it, we're like, no, I can't have babies with that man. Biologically, we're like, that's not going to work. I need to find someone with genetic diversity to create the most healthy children. That's like what our biology is telling us. It's what our hormones are telling us. Our smell, our taste, all of that, it changes. And so I've watched so many women get off the pill or get off their hormonal IUD or take out their injection, and within 6 months, their relationship ends. I've also seen women who have like been in a relationship and everything is right, but they're like, something is wrong. Like sexually, I'm just not into him. They go off of hormonal contraceptives, and out of nowhere, that missing piece in the relationship comes back online. So I've seen both camps. But yeah, what you're speaking to is like a very, very intense phenomenon that occurs. And it's really damaging to relationships. It's really heartbreaking. And I feel for the women and I also feel for the men because they have no idea what's going on. And they just know that like their partner's no longer attracted to them. And that is so heartbreaking to not feel desired, to not feel like your partner really wants you sexually. It is like it's devastating, you know? And so, yeah, I could speak about that a lot. But yeah, I am curious. Another part of your story is about being led into a path of gestational surrogacy. And so I would love to hear a little bit about the experience that you had with that and what connections you can make to the medicalization of your fertility and how that then led into your surrogacy journey.
Yeah, it was such a fascinating period of time. And so looking back, I just had this feeling. I had had my own biological children, and I felt like I was done having children, but I just had this feeling that I was meant to be pregnant again, and had a family member who utilized IVF and thought she had had a miscarriage. And my immediate in my body, my intuition was like, well, I can carry a baby for her. And this was even before I had my own children, which they won't even accept you as a surrogate at that point until you have your own proven pregnancies and births. But I just had, and that feeling stayed with me that this is something that I can do for somebody because my body responds well to pregnancy and birth. And so I felt called to try to help a family in that way, and ended up going through 3 cycles with 3 different families. And I learned so much about the medicalization of the cycle because the first cycle that I went through, they gave me a drug called Lupron, which completely shuts down your cycle completely. It puts you into menopause, essentially, is what they say. And the purpose of it is to give the doctors a clean slate so that they can then introduce the hormones to put you into a cycle and put it on the timing, their specific timing too, so that they can schedule exactly when they're going to do their tests and when they're going to do the implantation. And that drug, it was so incredibly profound for me that I um, just became, for whatever that week was that I was on it. I have very little memory of it, and I was not myself in any way, shape, or form. I had extreme highs and lows and just went into a very, very, very dark place. It was frightening. It was a really, really frightening experience, to the extent that when that cycle was unsuccessful, and then I went on and was thinking about working with another family, I said I would do it, but as long as the doctors could do it without using that drug in particular, which they were. It turned out that they can. It's not necessary. They can do it in a more natural way without using that drug. And another thing that really affected my body negatively was, then when they're reintroducing the hormones, they traditionally use an injectable progesterone. And so I did those shots, and my body reacted really negatively to them as well. Instead of not necessarily the hormone, but the injections, for whatever reason, turned into really big, hot, red, painful hematomas. And so that was another thing that, as I went into a second cycle, I said, I'll do this, but I can't do the injections. And as it turns out, they have a vaginal suppository that you can do instead, which is much more gentle on the body. And I guess those are all indications that from the start of this process, my body was not my own. And I was able to advocate for myself, but not until after I had had these really negative experiences, and where I was just, my body was kind of decimated in a way. I became somebody who was unrecognizable to myself. And so it felt good going into the second cycle to be able to enter into it with some knowledge and have some power. But um, still, it just was a complete disembodiment. I think throughout the close to 2 years that I went through the 3 different cycles, um, I really have very little memory of where I was, what I was doing during that period of time. I would say intuition was not something that was even in my consciousness whatsoever. I think I was existing, and I just was with that disconnection of my body, I really had nothing else. And knowing what I know now and where I am in this space where I am deeply connected to my body and to my intuition, it's just such a contrast from that period of time where it was the opposite. There was nothing, and then now in this really, really connected space, I can see the detriment that that had on me.
Yeah, the thing that you spoke to when we were talking about this before we pressed record, just saying, like one that you didn't even have any memory of that week when you were on Lupron, right? And even the whole 2 years that you were in this process of trying to get pregnant with three different families and like not being online, like your spirit not being online. You said your intuition not being online, just not recognizing yourself at all. It's so similar to how I felt during the 4.5 years that I was on the hormonal birth control pill. I really felt like when I didn't actually realize how far gone I was. I do remember the initial like feeling like a gray cloud kind of over me and just kind of like, okay, life feels heavier and I don't know what's going on and like I something's up, but I couldn't trace it to the pill. And it wasn't until I got off of it that I was like, wow, I like see life in color again. And so I feel the correlation between those two experiences, right? Of like essentially forcing your body into menopause in a really shocking way. One is just so disrespectful to your right as a woman to easily move into menopause over many years to go through that process, usually over like at least 5 years, sometimes up to like a whole decade, where your cycle is like slowly and slowly tapering off, getting longer, moving into the point where you finally transition into your years of not bleeding anymore. And so you have all of this time to transform, to shapeshift, to become a different person, to become the elder, the matriarch, the crone, the grandmother. That is such a sacred portal that a woman gets to go through. And so you didn't get that. You were essentially forced into this shocking experience of menopause in a week. Obviously, you wouldn't remember any of it. Obviously, you totally would not like have any consciousness of that because it is such a shock to not just the body, but the spirit. The spirit is like, I'm time traveling to a different phase of life that I'm not actually in right now. And it's similar to the way that hormonal contraceptives work, which is, I've said this in a past episode, there's like this myth that hormonal contraceptives, the pill in particular, convinces your body that you're already pregnant, which isn't true. Hormonally, the levels are most similar to that of a postmenopausal woman. And so we have these like 16, 17, 18, early 20-year-olds going onto the pill. They're coming into their most vital years of fertility. They're supposed to be in their like maiden motherhood years, and hormonally their levels are being expressed as their crone years. And so then there's so much soul fracturing and deep confusion. And I would say memory loss. Like when I think about that phase in my life, I'm kind of like, where was I? And then also just the connection of when you're on hormonal contraceptives, you don't feel like your body is your own. You don't feel like you're at home in your skin. You have no ability to tap into what you were speaking to, intuition. You can't tap into that biological body oracle that is telling you this is what I desire in life, not just with partners, but like with my path, with my work, with my art, with my creativity, with my projects, with my business, with my career, with my children. You can't orient to that. And so when you have women who are going through that phase of such extreme disembodiment with hormonal contraceptives, it then makes sense that if you were to move into kind of the journey that you were in, that sense of not being in your body is more familiar than it is to be in your body itself. And so then, yeah, you would have women who would be like, well, this is off, but I don't know how off it is because I don't even really know what my body is supposed to feel like, right? Is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And the thing that I wish I had known earlier in my life is that the womb is not just for creating human children. And it really is the the vessel of all creation for our lives. And I think that I just, and most people have a really limiting understanding of what the womb is. And if we did understand its power, we would be more intentional and think more about the things that we do to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that is the basis of this whole thing is that birth control itself is something that really is like what is the word? I mean, controlling is the easiest way I could put it, controlling our life force energy and not allowing us to be in deep communion with that, like that chi, right? The life force energy that births everything, not just children. And so when we are controlling that life force energy out of fear of getting pregnant, which is a normal fear, which is a very valid fear, one that I think every woman walks with. But when we then say, okay, well, we will control that life force energy of a child, it also means that there are external forces controlling the life force that would birth everything else in our life. And then our life is actually not our own as well. Um, you were mentioning, before we recorded about your daughter, she's 17 and she's moving into this phase of her life, and you knowing everything that you know, I'm curious, how do you want to pass all of this wisdom on to her? Where are you at with things? What, as a mother, would you maybe say to other mothers who are moving through this transition with their teenage daughters, young adult daughters, who are learning how to advocate for themselves, how to be in right relationship with their own wombs, their fertility, their womanhood, their femininity, any of that kind of stuff? I would really love to hear.
Yeah, Claire, it is hard. It's really, really hard because um, I would love to be able to make decisions for her, but she struggles with cystic acne, and we went down this path of trying lots of natural remedies and ended up going on hormonal birth control. And I'm a little bit grateful, perhaps, that none of them seem to be working really. And she has issues with each of them. And so it's opening up um, a dialogue, which I think is really all that that I, have a mother of a teenager, have, is the ability to talk about these things and talk about the alternatives. And I'm just so grateful to be continuing to learn myself about all of these things so that I can just naturally have these conversations in a way that's not like, let me tell you about this, because that's when, if anybody who is a teenager, especially a teenage daughter, that is when they shut down. If like, I need to teach you about something, it's like ears completely turn off. And so the fact that I am on this journey and I am learning and I can approach things in a way like, hey, I just heard this really crazy thing. It's more it's better received by her. And so I think that that's a blessing. And really we just can learn and grow and walk together, and that's all that we really are able to do.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I'm in a phase with someone in my life who's on hormonal contraceptives, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and the inner part of me is like screaming, like, that's the root of the problem, get off of it. And I'm like, okay, that isn't how anyone wants to be approached with this, actually. And everyone has a right to choose for themselves what their relationship with their body and their fertility and their feminine vitality is going to look like. And it's a big unwinding and big unraveling process as well. It is not just physically really shocking to the system, but on like a womb psyche level, on a spiritual level, on a soul level. There's so much repair that has to be done. And it takes time. It takes a long time just to come to your own seat of intuition, what your body is telling you and what your spirit is telling you. And it's exactly that, what you were saying of like being able to offer and respect another person's autonomy as well and their process and to just walk with them with grace. Yeah.
And I believe that we're in this period of time when women, especially, and men too, are experiencing an awakening. And I think that this is part of that awakening. I'm just hearing so many people just talk more openly about their experiences and be writing about it, like you, Claire. And I'm a believer that nothing is 100% bad, nothing is 100% good, and that to put judgment on it too is also not helpful. Like, I don't have any negative feelings. I don't have any regret around going through my surrogacy journey, even though it may have had some profound long-term effects on my body that I may not even be realized yet. I think it was all meant to be and part of the process. And so I think honoring that for my daughter is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Well, for anyone who has been listening to this episode or any of the other episodes and are interested in, one, transitioning off of hormonal contraceptives and IUDs, getting the physical support that your body needs in order to support your organ systems, in order to support your digestion, in order to support your cycle coming back online. That was our first class that we had this past week. If you still want to join, doors are still open. This upcoming week, we're going to be talking all about biointuitive fertility tracking. So, learning how to observe the four phases of your menstrual cycle, knowing when your fertile window is, knowing what timing you would need in order to employ the herbal allies that we'll be focusing on in the following week on October 19th. That class will be all about knowing how to time different herbal protocols for pregnancy prevention. That is all interwoven with the other two classes. So the three-part series is available for $33. It includes all three live classes, lifetime access to the recordings, a very long, extensive resource guide. But more importantly, I would say, is the collective womb prayer of women all coming together and learning all of this education that was supposed to be passed down from us. And it's a huge, huge shame and deep grief and deep sadness that these wisdom keeping traditions of our mother lines have been fractured. It's very heavy and it's very sad. And it's also really beautiful because, as you were saying, Sarah, like I do feel women waking up deeply to the power of their wombs, their womb consciousness, not just as individuals, but as a collective. And so being able to come together with other women who are in this same process, to have a community of people who are supporting you and sharing similar experiences and being able to resource with one another and not feel alone in this, I think is like the most important part of this class. And yeah, I'm super excited. It's been incredible thus far. People can join. I will have the show notes, the link in the show notes available. So thank you so much, Sarah. Do you want to share anything else?
No, just thank you so much, Claire. I've learned so much from you, and I'm just very, very grateful.
Thank you.